My name is Minh Lê, and I am primarily I started out as a picture book author and just love that world so much. I've always had an affinity and a love for picture books, but I've also started to write middle grade graphic novels, which has been such a wonderful space to grow into and kind of learn about. So the two books that we're going to talk about today are Real to Me, a new picture book that came out in May from me and Raissa Figueroa from Random House, Knopf, and then also a new middle grade graphic novel called Enlighten Me, which is coming out this month, September, from Little Brown by me and Chan Chau, and who is an amazing, amazing illustrator.
Welcome to the Picture Booking Podcast. My name is Nick Patton, and I have the honor of introducing today's host, Nadia Salomon. Enjoy!
I have to tell you, I was incredibly impressed with both for what they are, what concepts, because that's really what these two books felt like to me. They're very strong concepts about not necessarily something physically tangible, but it's out there. It exists. You can't really touch it or feel it like physically, but you still feel it emotionally. And so that's what I really loved about that connection between those two books. So to get us started, we'll start off with Real to Me, and tell us a little bit about that book, and read one of your favorite pages to us.
Yeah, no, Real to Me is my and Rice's take on the imaginary friend story. And I've always loved these stories. And I think for me, what I love about the imaginary friend construct is that for kids, I love that they're in a space where the real and the imaginary are the boundaries between the two are very fluid, right? It's like when you're talking to a kid with an imaginary friend, it's like there's nothing fake or not real about those emotions, about that relationship, about those dynamics that they're feeling. So that kind of space where what we're as adults dubbing as imaginary grows up against the very real experience of the child having these very real emotions and real relationships. I always thought it was a fun thing to explore. And also it's a place to talk about friendship dynamics in a way that's a little bit, like I said, a little bit out there, a little bit whimsical, a little bit fantastical, and in this case, maybe with a slight melancholy undertone. Um, but the story is about two friends, one of whom is imaginary, and they're the best of friends. And then one day, one of the friends disappears, and then the story follows the character who then has to figure out how to move forward when their friend is no longer there. Um, what's really interesting to me about the book is that I knew there's that, like I said, that kind of melancholy undertone because it's about losing, like having a friend go away. Um, what I didn't realize is how it will hit readers on different levels.
Mm-hmm.
For like because I'll get feedback from people say, "Oh, I was a military kid growing up, so we moved all the time, and I was constantly having to say goodbye to friends and make new friends." Um, and then on the other end of the spectrum, hearing from people who said, I've actually lost a friend who's no longer with us anymore,
Mm-hmm.
and how that hits on a very, very different level. And my family and I, we actually lost a really close friend of ours right before this book came out. And so when I was preparing to share this book with people, suddenly I was reading it even in a different light than I had written it. And so my editor said the one thing she loves about this book is that it meets people where they are. And so that's what I'm hoping with as picture book authors, we're hoping to write a book that does connect with audiences. And to do that, you have to give a little bit of space so that the audience, the reader, can bring their own experience to the story, right? I think this one lends itself well to that. And I think especially because of Raissa's unbelievable artwork, she just kind of created these rich, dazzling worlds for these characters to inhabit, that I think just really breathes an amazing amount of life into the story. And what's great is so during the height of the pandemic, I was online way too much, and I was just like bouncing around different websites, and I stumbled upon Raissa's portfolio, and I tweeted out like that day with some images from her website saying that I just discovered Raissa Figueroa's artwork. I live here now. I love this. I just was totally fell in love with her style and her vision. And then the next day or so, I get an email from my editor, Rotem Moskovich at Canop, saying, "That's really interesting that you tweeted that out because she's on our short list of possible illustrators for Real to Me."
Oh
And
my
so,
gosh.
yeah, so apparently it was just meant to be. Um, I was honored that she was available to work on the book, and I was just more than happy to hand the reins over to her once the manuscript was done and just see what she could do with it.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. And, to touch upon, some of the commentaries that you made about the book, like my takeaway when I read it was not just about having an imaginary friend, but moving on
Mhm.
and having hope and
Right.
being able to learn to grow from um, one relationship to another, and seeing both characters move on in different ways. I don't want
Mhm.
to give it away because
Right. There's a little bit of a twist in there that I'm hoping.
yeah, because of the twist. So I don't want to give it away, but I think the book was beautifully written. I think the illustrations are incredible, and you know I'm going to throw this out there, but her work reminds me a lot of Dan Santat's work, who you've worked a lot with, and you've written and worked on similar kind of themes that are not tangible, but tangible and hilarious at the same time. And so that's why I really love this book, because it was just so, it was emotionally resonant, which is something that I feel is found in a lot of your work, whether it be, Real to Me, whether it be your graphic novel that we're going to talk about a little later, Enlighten Me. But I discovered your work when I saw Drawn to Me.
Mhm. Oh, drawn together,
I am sorry, Drawn Together.
right?
Um, and when I read that book, I felt seen,
Mhm.
because when you're a child of immigrants, sometimes the relationships that you have aren't necessarily in English.
Right.
Right? They're in a different language, or sometimes like there's like you were saying, like a lack of communication, because either you don't know the language yet, or if you do know the language, there's always that, oh, you speak it differently than we do, kind of thing. There's always that differential. And I loved how in one of your presentations, when you were talking about that book and you were talking about all the different elements and all the different scenes, and how they resonated and connected to that one unifying theme. And that's kind of what I feel when I read Real to Me, or when I read Enlighten Me, because there's like one thread, one laser focus, and that emotion that you carry from beginning to end. So tell us a
Oh,
little bit about that for Real to Me.
I think that's a well. First of all, thank you for all the kind words. Um, I think the thread that connects apparently all of the books I read, because I was at a school visit recently, and the librarian was like, "I've figured out the common thread that connects everything that you write, and it's the idea of connection, right? um, whether that's connecting with yourself, connecting with the people around you, connecting with a story, and through that connection discovering something about yourself. And I think that's something that is probably the underlying theme of Real to Me, and that it's about the validity and beauty of the connection you make with a friend, um, even if other people are telling you that it's not real, right? And then also, like you're talking about, like the idea of like moving on, it's about like what that connection means when it's physically not there anymore, right? Like, how do you move on? You still carry what the value from that friendship and from that relationship with you. Like, because when you have a really strong friendship like that, whether they're here or not anymore, there's something that you take with you from that friendship, right? You've grown emotionally through that relationship, and that's not something that anyone can take away from you. So I think that idea of connection and that idea of the persistent value of those what those connections mean and what they mean to you and to the people around you is probably the thing that is the backbone of not just real to me, but probably everything that I write.
Yeah.
Um, it's interesting you talk about the drawn together, and because it sounds like you and I have similar um, backgrounds as we were growing up and like struggling with and grappling with language and like how to
Mhm.
communicate with family. Someone's asked me recently about how I came to writing picture books, and I realized that having a childhood where I spent so much of my time trying to figure out how to communicate without using a lot of words, I was like, that actually was great preparation for being a picture book author. Like, how do you convey a story? How do you convey a complex idea if you're not if words are not your primary mode of communication, right? And
Mhm.
I'm lucky that I get to put these ideas out there and then work with illustrators like Raissa and Dan who take these ideas and just weave these beautiful worlds out of it. Um, so yeah, I feel very fortunate to get to do that. And and the idea of connection, this is where I get a little bit meta because the books are about connection, and then the books themselves become my way of connecting with people in the world, like talking to you, going to school, talking to kids. It's like as a naturally kind of like shy and introverted person, putting these books out there suddenly gives me an avenue and a reason to be talking to people, whether it's about their families or the power of stories or just like just anything, right? So um I guess the bottom line is for me as a just a human in the world, connection is something that I'm always seeking of, even if it doesn't always come naturally. And I think that's why that theme is something that comes through in everything that I write.
Yeah, and you do it in an incredibly fun way.
Oh, thank you.
It's unique. It's different. I mean, if you look at Lift, if you look at, Drawn Together, um, they're all, I don't want to say they're concept because they're not really concept, but they're just, that split moment in your life where you're reimagining it to share on a larger scale, and you have to figure out how to present it. And I think you collaborate with your illustrators in a way that is full, enriching, encompassing of that idea, but it's just laid out so perfectly. It's like there are no questions. Like you don't wonder or question. Like sometimes when you read a picture book, it's left up to the imagination, and sometimes I feel like it's very crisp, it's very clear. And how do you work with your illustrators to get to that point?
My approach is to write something that is takes as light of a touch as possible. I tend to when I'm thinking of an idea, and I'm glad to use the like I think you said like it's a concept because when I come up with the key to me for the picture book and what unlocks it is that concept. And I feel like the concept of, for example, a girl who finds a magic elevator button that turns her that allows her to travel. um, I come up with the idea and then I kind of back my way into the text. And my goal is to put a text out there that gives the illustrator something to play with and gives them room to work their magic, right? And a good example with Lyft and how you kind of bake in the collaboration into that process is so in the book, the young girl finds a magic elevator button. She tapes up against her wall in her room, presses it, then her closet turns into this magic elevator that allows her to travel to anywhere. In the manuscript, I never specified what was on the other side of that door, right? The door opens up, and then I was basically like, Dan, wherever you want to take her, wherever that adventure you think that adventure should go, I'm gonna leave that up to you. I was like, if you think I'm being lazy and you want some recommendations or suggestions, I'm happy to provide them. But I want the illustrator to have as much room to bring their own storytelling talents to the table as possible. I think for me, that's what makes a picture book feel more seamless and feel kind of unlocks its full potential. And if I were to try to keep the reins on too tight, I feel like that would be in my that wouldn't be in my best interest because I'm not allowing the illustrator space to fully like stretch their wings out, right? So for me, it's the collaboration is baked into the manuscript, baked into the way I try to conceive of the story, and then also my natural inclination to kind of step aside for the talent of the illustrators to shine. Because for me, just as kind of picture books I like to read and I think succeed in the way that my mind works, the illustrations are what's carrying the day. And I'm so that's how I tend to write.
So now, tell us about Raissa's artwork.
Mhm.
Tell us about, like, not necessarily the expectation, but seeing that you're leaving room for the illustrator. Like, show us one of your favorite pages and tell us why that's your favorite page. Like, what is it about the art that um, resonated with you and with the text that you wrote?
Well, the first thing that I love about her artwork is just the her use of color is amazing. Like this page right here,
Yeah, it's
the
phenomenal.
the yellows on the page just like glow in a way that just like radiates off the page.
Mhm.
I think that for a book about an imaginary friend and taking place in this imaginary world, that luminescence that she brings to the page and to the illustrations just kind of gives it that magical quality, right? There's something about this that right away you're looking at it, you don't have to know what the story's about. It feels magical to me.
Mhm.
Um, but kind of similar, like it's interesting that you mentioned that you see similarities between her and Dan, because I'd say similar things drew me to their artwork in that there's so much energy, such amazing use of color, so much playfulness and humor in both of their artwork, but it's also grounded in this like deep sense of like heart in their illustrations, right? There's something there that um feels kind of like this elemental sense of emotional resonance in her use of characters, her this the way she like the spread I pointed out before, and I it's hard to choose one, but you have the two friends and they're on opposite spreads, opposite pages, and there's just there are no real and there's some words on the page, but really you don't need to see the words to feel that connection, right?
Right.
She somehow kind of creates this deep sense of a enduring relationship just through their positioning, through the way that they're looking at each other, through the lighting in the room. Um, and so there's like I said, there's such an emotional depth to her artwork. And I knew that for a story like this, you want to balance the playful, the whimsical, the imaginary with something real, right?
Mhm.
And that real, that emotional truth is the heart of their friendship. And then everything kind of grows from that. But yeah, I knew right away when I looked at her portfolio, I was like, this is an amazing talent, and I'd love to get to work with her.
Now, for that spread that you chose, what emotion do you feel she captured really well on that page or on that spread?
On this spread, I feel like for me, looking at the two of them here, she was able to capture just like a deep sense of comfort with another person, right? And I think that to me is when friendships kind of take on that extra layer of depth. When you can just be completely comfortable and secure in that one-on-one interaction, right? Not that you're not going to have bumps in the road and stuff like that, but like in that moment on that spread, they just feel completely in tune, completely able to be themselves. Um, which I guess is kind of sad because then it sets up the the turn when the friend's no longer there, and then that becomes that loss of that deep sense of connection and comfort um, is where the drop comes, and that then you have to deal with what do you do when that connection is not there, and that person that you were so comfortable with, someone that you can like totally be yourself around, isn't there anymore. So that's where the sad part of the story comes in. But I've had a lot of people say, "Oh, this book is so sad." And I'm like, there has to be space for sad books too, right? And on the shelf, the hope is that there's every emotion you can imagine represented there that you could find. And so this one hits a little bit more on the melancholy side, a little bit more on the sad side. Um, I'm okay with that.
But you know what? I don't really feel it's as sad as people think.
Yeah,
I think it's a mindset you
mhm.
have to reframe because there's hope.
That's what I'm hoping. Yeah,
For me, I found hope at the end of the story. So even though it's a bit melancholic, but there's hope at the end of the story, which is what I want. Or I don't know, for me, that was my takeaway. And, and I love that you're leaving the takeaway to be whatever the reader feels. But now let's go back to the title. The
right.
title for me feels like it has double meaning. Or am I reading into it?
No, I always love titles with double, triple, quadruple meanings if possible.
So, what were
Um,
you trying to say with that title?
I mean, I think I touched upon it a little bit before, the idea that for adults to label a friendship as imaginary, um, kind of does a disservice or doesn't honor the real nature of that relationship, right? For a kid with a quote unquote imaginary friend, um, that friendship is totally real. Those emotions that you're feeling aren't imaginary, right? So that even in a relationship that could be determined to be or labeled as imaginary, there's very real elements there. And then also because of the trying to figure out how to talk about it without spoiling the book. Because
Yes,
the
let's
twist
not
is
spoil it.
yeah. Um because with the I was trying to figure out a different approach to the imaginary friend story, the
Mhm.
question of like what is real and what are your assumptions going into a book was something that I wanted to play around with as well.
Because even the concept of an imaginary friend,
Mhm.
like we say it's imaginary, but technically it's real because we're talking about it.
Exactly. And I was doing an interview and the host had asked like, so what should parents tell their kids when they say they're imaginary friends? Should they kind of discourage it? Should they kind of steer them away? And I was like, kids have their whole lives to be grown-ups, to be in the quote unquote real world. There's something very beautiful about this friendship and this person, this friend that or character that you have created from your own imagination. And the fact that that child is sharing that with you is such a beautiful invitation to bring you as the adult into this world, right? So like why would you discourage that? Why would you do anything to minimize that or kind of usher them out of that phase? I think it's such a beautiful place to be. And it's such a beautiful indication of the power of a child's imagination to conjure this up. So for me, I'm like it's such a wonderful thing to witness and such an honor to when a child shares that with you that I would want to protect that as much as possible.
I feel like, we need books like that because it offers a sensibility that I think for so many years we've overlooked. And I think in the public consciousness, in a way, we're making more efforts to acknowledging and respecting and being more mindful of our children's feelings versus our generation, maybe where our parents were like, oh, get over it, you know, right? And I just feel like it's awesome to have a book like Real to Me on the shelf that also helps us reprocess some of these um sensibilities that maybe we grew up with the tough love, but like with our kids we're just being more mindful
Right?
of their
Yeah,
needs and emotions.
yeah. And then that's always kind of the hope to kind of put a book out there that allows for that kind of emotional exploration and kind of validation. So I'm glad that that came through for you. For me, there's also the element again talking around the twist in the book. I love that picture books give young readers a space to it's almost like an introduction to literary criticism, right? So it's engaging you as a reader. I think of like there's a monster at the end of this book, which is one of my favorite books as a kid. It's like the introduction to metafiction and what your role is as a reader. in the physical act of reading and like creating the narrative yourself, um, you can introduce these complex elements at a young age that they may not understand or really fully understand at the time, but then later you realize that you were engaging that understanding of literature in a different way. So for this one, the hope is that when you're reading it, it will make you question the assumptions that you come into a book with, and then kind of on a reread, and that is a form of literary criticism, right? You're interrogating your own process, your own like I said, assumptions as a reader, and how does that interact with the book itself? How do you figure out where your the narrative that you are actively engaging in, how does that unfold? So without getting too deep into that type of literary criticism, just like the idea of just like poking a little bit at the at the reader's engagement to kind of like scratch that itch in the back of their mind about like what is the story and who are these characters.
Yeah. This book is so phenomenal. Please
Oh,
read us one of your favorite pages. Or I know as an author, there are times when I read, Goodnight Ganesha or some of my other manuscripts that are in the works, and I'll hit a line and it just resonates with me, and I'm like, I can't believe I wrote that. So what's it for you with this book? Like, what's your favorite line out of this book?
it's tricky because the like I said, the books I write are so short.
Hmm.
One line kind of spans a couple pages, so I can read it like a couple pages
Sure.
if so. I'll go. When you have a great friend, the rest of the world can seem to disappear. Others tried to tell me that she wasn't real, that she was just imaginary. But what did they know? We laughed together, were brave together, got in trouble together, and sometimes we were even quiet together. My friend was always there for me, and I can't imagine anything more real than that. So that's the opening of the book, and I think it captures a lot of like what I was hoping to go for. And then another educator I was talking to, described it as poetry, which was a surprise to me because I don't think of myself as writing in a poetic style. But I was hoping that repetition of we laugh together, we're brave together, or even quiet together, something that we repeat a couple of times in the narrative to kind of give it some hopeful rhythm for the reader to come back to and kind of draw those comparisons as the story evolves. So yeah, that's the opening of Real to Me.
Yeah, it's a beautiful book.
Oh, thank you.
And before we switch out to Enlighten Me, what's, the big takeaway that you want people to have as, this book becomes more popular and it gets read more?
For me, I guess the takeaway would be that you get to decide what's real. And when it comes to friendships and relationships, you can carry that value with you, even if your friend isn't there anymore. Right. So like that what made them your friend is real, is true, and no one can take that away from you.
That is so awesome. Such a great, powerful, statement. And also something that I think teachers, educators, and parents can also help children with, because that is something that kids have a tough time with, like moving on or losing relationships. So I think this book, there's a need for it or a market for it.
Oh, thank you.
Now, for Enlighten Me, okay, I I am in love with that piece because it has so many themes, so many concepts that you and the illustrator were able to weave in, and I think it's a very succinct book. Tell us a little bit about how that book came to be compared to Enlighten Me. Like, you're moving from one concept to a different concept because it's, again, something that's not physically tangible in a way like you can touch it, but you can feel it.
Um, Yeah, it's interesting. The so Enlighten Me takes place at a silent meditation retreat, and I've had the idea as like a thorn in my side for or a burr in my brain for forever to write a story that takes place at a silent meditation retreat. I think it was just something about that construction and that setting that I thought would be a really fun nut to crack. And it for those of you who are writers or creators, it was the idea that kept popping up again at like 2 a.m. in the morning when I was trying to sleep. That idea would just like poke its head up, be like, "Hey, I'm still here," and
Mm-hmm.
so it's like I can see you now. I know that you know that feeling, and when after a while you realize the fact that that idea keeps coming back to you means okay, I should probably write it. It's like
Right.
there's something there. If I'm still thinking about it 10 years later, it's not just this flash in the pan. It's like okay, um, but I didn't know what the story would be. For a while, I thought it was going to be like a short story for you'll get a kick out of this. I was like, what if I wrote a short story for adults? But it's like there's a murderer who is hiding out at a silent meditation. The detective has to go undercover to try to find that person without being able to actually talk to anyone. And so like this like murder mystery where no one could speak. So it's like I feel that'd be a really fun thing to write. So there are all kinds of ideas that were swirling around
Mm-hmm.
about what to write at this setting. But then a couple years ago, someone approached me and asked if I would write a graphic novel memoir. And I wasn't quite comfortable with the idea of like a full-on straight memoir, but I had this idea for a memoir style story with a kind of fantastical spin. So for those of you, well, to give a quick recap of the book, it follows a young boy named Ben who gets in trouble at school. He's very quiet, he's very shy. He gets in trouble at school when he kind of like fights back against some bullies there. And then he ends up going to a silent meditation retreat with his family. And while he tries to meditate, he's not very good at it, and his imagination kind of wanders. And he had to leave behind his Game Boy for the weekend. So his imagination kind of dives into that video game world. And then at a certain point, one of the Buddhist nuns there takes all the kids aside. And even though they're still not allowed to talk, she tells them stories about the Buddha's life and also the Jataka tales, which are stories about the Buddha's past lives.
Mm-hmm.
And so then, as Ben is listening to these stories, he starts imagining himself in each one. And in doing so, he kind of works through a lot of the internal struggles that he's grappling with through those stories. And the character for me was important because the character is at an age that for me felt like a very kind of like a critical juncture in that I remember being that age and feeling this pull to retreat into myself and kind of withdraw from my family or community, just kind of like take things as a personal burden and kind of like go off on my own, right? And I think that's a very natural thing to feel. And I wanted to write a book where it kind of showed and honored that instinct, but then showed that character finding his way back to his family, his community, through the power of story. And so it's very personal, and it's funny. I joke that the character's name is Bin instead of Min, so it's a very um secretive non-memoir. If you can crack that code by changing the letter from B to M, then you'll figure it out. But I think so it's very autobiographical in a lot of ways. And I grew up in Connecticut. My grandparents came here from Vietnam. My parents and grandparents came here from Vietnam. Um, but my grandparents started a Buddhist temple in Vietnam when I was growing up. So I spent a lot of my weekends
Mm-hmm.
at this temple, which was in a random like farmhouse somewhere to start. And I remember going there every weekend and there'd be all this beautiful chanting and like ritual, but I was drawn to it in a way, but I also couldn't understand it. Like I think the chanting is actually in Sanskrit, so I was like, I don't know what they're saying. It sounds interesting, but I didn't have a foothold into the actual meaning behind any of it. But on the second floor of the building, there's a little room that was a library, and my sisters and I would go in there. I remember spending time in there just reading these books, and some of them were illustrated about the Buddha's life, about some of these stories, and that became my entry point into a lot of the Buddhist concepts and story. So it was through story that I kind of found my way into the spiritual, if you want to call it that. So for me, that was also a very personal part of this story, where it's like it's through it's there's religious and spiritual elements of it, but it's really through Ben's engagement with these stories that he's able to find his way into something deeper, and something more meaningful for him. And what I love about the book too is that I grew up with all these stories, and some of them sometimes there'd be some spot illustrations here and there, but I didn't really see any of these stories visually represented in any kind of deep way. So to see Chan's artwork take these stories and just infuse them and bring them to life with so much energy and so much vibrancy and so much fun was just amazing to watch. And I love that this generation of readers will see some of these stories portrayed in a way that hopefully will be accessible and exciting and dynamic, and that'll be an entry point into this broader conversation.
Yeah, no, like 2 points going back to the name change. I did realize that it was, uh, you know, life inspired as I read it, and I uh, I thought it was interesting that you chose B for
Mm.
bin because I don't know, maybe I'm taking a giant leap here, but I was thinking of it as I'm reading the story, how his name ties into the element of enlightenment, right?
Right.
Because it's like it felt like a very transitory, is that like even a
Mhm.
word, or transitional name,
Uh,
because you're transitioning from one state to another state to get to enlightenment. But I don't know, maybe I'm reading too much into it,
no,
but
I like
that's
that.
that's what I got as I read it when I tied the theme back to the name. And then I also loved how you incorporated, or the illustrator incorporated, story through the use of, gaming. Because in like I remember when I was in that age group and a bit older, uh, how like we use gaming as a form of um, learning, because everyone thinks, oh, you're like a game head, and you just play these games, but they don't realize like how much effort, thought, and strategy that you have to use in order to play the game to beat whatever the end game is, right?
I love that idea, because that was something that we tried to balance in the book. In that, on the one hand, there's the benefit of like being at a silent meditation retreat, setting your Game Boy aside, and like kind of like the value of setting it aside. But also, I didn't want to demonize video games, because there is this inherent value in there, and especially my wife made a good point that video games are a form of storytelling, and you're engaged with that storytelling. So for Ben, when he's in his imagination, he's imagining things using these video game constructs and these video game concepts. It's his way of telling this story about using the video game worlds that he inhabits to weave his own narrative and make sense of his own narrative.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, it was definitely a balance of trying to show value in both. Show value in setting it aside, but also the value inherent in engaging with it as well. Um, and as to your first point about the name change, I like you're making me think about it more now, because um, I chose the name Bin because I think it translated it means peace. I think. Um, but your idea also of like changing my own name as a way of getting closer to something true is kind of consistent with the way I think about stories, right? Like it's like you fictionalize it not to get further from the truth, but somehow to get closer to the truth. That gives you a little bit of leeway, a little bit of more room to play with, um, to hopefully hit something that is just as true, if not more so, than a quote unquote memoir. So I like your interpretation.
Yeah, I literally I was like, oh, I'm gonna read a couple pages while I do something else. And then as I started reading, I was like, okay, I'm gonna just like stop what I'm doing and just like I just kept reading and reading and like I did it, I don't know, like it felt like I did it within an hour or so. Like I just like literally just consumed it because it was just you know, an interesting viewpoint, an interesting way that the story was told. And then I love some of the um you know, old school games that were in the illustration that I was like, I think this is this video game. Oh, I think that video game. And it's funny because each of those video games that were selected, I don't know if it was intentional, but like the first one, can I say
Okay,
what
yeah,
that was? Okay, so the first one when I looked at it, what like it reminded me of Donkey Kong and like like the rage, you know what I mean? And then like now I'm gonna forget, but like the second one had like very Super Mario themes, which
yeah.
felt like very fluid and like, you know, how you have to like navigate all these different worlds to get, you know, to the end of the game. And I can't remember the last one, but like I felt like, you know, the three different games that were used or that I noticed or picked up on, like I wondered if there
Right.
was intent with that, with the illustrator.
Yeah, no, there was definitely we thought about the games that I grew up with and what would be appropriate for those scenes. So like yeah, the first scene you're talking about that calls to mind Donkey Kong is that he's in trouble with his vice principal, and the vice principal says he's gonna call home. And so then he imagines himself as this character and the vice principal as a Donkey Kong character throwing a phone. And he has to like, watch them all before someone picks up. So like that to me is like him using the familiar worlds of video games to process the stress that he's under, right?
Right,
And seeing and also processing that stress in a context that seems like something that you can address. You have some agency in a video game, right?
right.
It's hard to overcome, but it's like there's something that you can do, right?
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, there's some Donkey Kong references, some Mario references. There's like a kind of like a Street Fighter
Oh
style,
yes, that's what it was, Street Fighter.
and those
Yes,
are all
especially with that favorite scene that you showed me. That's what
that
it was.
that I love because I love Street Fighter when I was growing up, and to see Chan figure out how to convey this old school face off in this like parable from hundreds of years ago into something more modern was just a delight for me to see. Um, so yeah, the video game imagery was very intentional, and and I think a way of bringing these stories which have been around forever um, and filtering them through a modern sensibility, right? So you have everything that is going on in the book in these imaginary worlds are filtered through Bin's imagination. So whether it's through um, the video game kind of filter, or just like there's a lot of times when the main character is talking back to the narrator, and there's kind of like a modern sensibility and modern sense of humor infused into the narrative, so it doesn't feel like a straight retelling of these stories, but a retelling as kind of guided by this child's world and mindset. So for me, that was the mechanism for bringing these stories into the present day and making them hopefully accessible and tying them to some kind of emotionally resonant beat for young people. Because the thing I love about the Jataka tales as a construct or as a set of stories is the idea is that the Buddha that we hear about, the statues that you see everywhere, is that final form, right? It's like the that the Buddha has finally reached enlightenment. The Jataka tales are all of the lives that came before. So as that same being has been reincarnated, figuring their way toward and making steps towards enlightenment. And it lends itself really well to the idea of a video game, because it's like, if you die, you mess up, you start again, you try again until you get it right, until you reach that final phase, until you finish, until you win the game. And so the idea of enlightenment and the possibilities of like it being on a continuum, it being a path, um, and not just being something that you attain instantly. Hopefully, it's something that for young people, it's like, yeah, we don't have to be perfect right now, but we can figure out a way to take a step in the right direction if we want to. And then doing that in a way that's hopefully fun was what I was hoping for, at least.
I think you achieved that. I mean, it this story was just so multi-layered, not only um, in the text, but also in the illustrations. And that's what I loved about it. Now, you showed us earlier your favorite page when we were taking photos. Show us that page and tell us why that particular spread speaks to you.
Yeah, let's pull it up. So the spread I showed you was, again, it's so hard to choose, but the first Jataka tale that the children hear is about a character named Prince Five Weapons, and he battles against this mythical creature in the forest. And in the manuscript, they face off each other kind of in like a video game setting, kind of like in a Street Fighter battle. So the page I showed you here just kind of shows this confrontation in a way that just brought back so many visceral, nostalgic memories of sitting around with my sisters or my cousins or my friends around the Super Nintendo with a controller, and like having that face off moment. This if you're listening, you can't see, but it's like that menu where like you pick your character and then the battle's about to begin. And for me, that has such a sense of anticipation. Like you're about to the game's about to start, right? And for this particular scene, like I said, I hadn't seen it portrayed in any kind of way really growing up. To see it in a setting that felt so familiar and felt so engaging in a way that I understood just makes me so happy. And then from there, they actually do battle, and like there's like a scene where like the prince has like a menu bar of weapons to draw from, and it just fits so well with the story and what Chan was able to show in the artwork. It just kind of it all came together. And for me as a writer, I'm always wary of, am I putting too much expectation and pressure on the illustrator by with this scene? Like, is this scene too much to figure out how to convey visually? Um, and to see that come back even better than I imagined was just wonderful.
And what was it like collaborating with the illustrator for Enlighten Me?
It was great, and they're so talented. And I actually the connection came because I don't know if you remember Nerd Camp Michigan, was a conference, and I was talking to Chan's agent. After hours, we were sitting around chatting, and I was telling them about Enlighten Me, and Chan's agent Molly O'Neill was like, "Oh, I think I have someone who would be perfect for that." And so that's how we connected. And Chan was just about to start doing the Babysitter Club adaptations, which are just brilliant. And so they were now, when we connected, they were not yet number one New York Times best-selling illustrator Chan Chau, but we now get to put that on the cover. And just to see all the Chan's also Vietnamese American, so to see all the kind of like them coming from a similar place of cultural specificity and understanding some of the nuances of where I was coming from was amazing. To kind of be able to use shorthand or not fill in all the details, because I was confident that Chan was able to breathe in the corners of the page with details from their own experience was a beautiful collaboration.
And what does this book mean to you in a way? Because of all the, um, you know, it's not only a personal story, memoirish, but it's also you get to work and collaborate with someone who shares a similar, you know, heritage. And with the books that we're finding on the shelves, we're finding more and more of, you know, our stories, immigrant stories. How does it make you feel knowing that you're contributing to that bookshelf?
Yeah, no, I mean that's the dream, right? To be able to add something to the shelf to that fills out the what's available there that wasn't there before. What I talk to people about a lot is like as a reader growing up, um, I love to read, and I was like really into Greek mythology for a while. And when I was reading in high school, like I felt like everything was referencing things like from Greek mythology or from the Bible or from the Western tradition. And so I, as a child of immigrants and refugees, felt like I was always playing catch up. I was like, I know this is referencing something probably from the Bible. I don't know what it is. It's like if you're watching, if you come and watch like the last Marvel movie and you haven't watched anything before, you're like everyone's cheering at this one person popping up on the screen. You're like, so I know that there's more to this character. I just don't know what that is.
Right.
Um, so for me, a lot of times I felt like I was playing catch up and trying to fill in the gaps as I went. So to write a book now that uses as its foundation some of these Buddhist stories and concepts means a lot to me because then it's like maybe for the child who grew up with these stories, they now are able to access this familiar territory and kind of build off of a familiar context. And then for the children who did grow up with these stories, it can be an introduction to those and open up these new worlds, kind of like these stories opened up Greek mythology and stories from the Bible for me as a reader coming from the outside. Um, and the hope is that even though the story is very specific on some of the cultural details and some of the other details, that it hits on something that is universal that readers of any background can resonate with. I think the idea of being a kid and being misunderstood by your parents or the grown-ups around you, feeling like you want to retreat from the people around you and wanting to find your way back and not being able to concentrate because you want to play video games instead, like all those ideas and concepts are hopefully something that are universally relatable. And so that the hope is to write a book that hits on both levels. It can resonate with someone because of its cultural specificity, and then it can also resonate with people because of the universalities that are underneath those. Um, so yeah, my hope is that kids will have fun reading this book, that they'll find some inherent value that they can carry with them after reading it, and that they'll want to read it again and pass it on to friends.
That is so awesome. I see that we're almost out of time. Oh my gosh, we've been talking so much. Before we go, what what is up next for you? What's on tap?
I love that question because when I started out writing, the hope, the unattainable dream was to have one book on the shelf, right?
Mhm.
It's like if I can just like that's when you're on the outside looking in, you're aspiring. That's all you're hoping for. And I feel so fortunate I get to keep writing. So Enlighten Me is my ninth book. And then in I think the next one, I have several projects in the works. Um, the next one coming out, I think, would be it's a fourth picture book with Dan Santat. Um, it's called Built to Last. And I always say like I think of these books all kind of existing within us. They're not sequels to each other, but they kind of orbit each other in a way.
Mhm.
So I think of if Drawn Together, the first one we did together was about kids and their grandparents. Then there's Lift, which was about siblings, and then The Blur, which was about kids and their parents or the adults in their lives. Built to Last is about friendships. And so and Dan has started to share some artwork from it, and it's really fun because the book and the manuscript is very light, doesn't say much about who these friends are, but Dan read the manuscript and decided to make the two characters a baby Min and a baby Dan, and, and growing up together. So it's really fun. Um, and so that comes out in, I believe, May. And then after that, I was had the incredible honor of being invited to write the authorized picture book biography of the Zen monk Thich Nhat Hanh, um,
Oh,
who is a personal hero of mine. He's a Vietnamese Zen master who spoke out against the Vietnam War. He was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He's done so much to spread the idea of mindfulness and peace across the world. Um, he passed away about 2 years ago, I believe. So I'm working on the picture book biography of his, and it's going to be illustrated by Katja Chen, who's one of the
she's
best illustrators.
incredible.
Yeah. I always say it's amazing to talk to other illustrators, um, because Katja always seems to come up with this like tone of reverence of like as like
Mhm.
an artist.
Well,
And I
she is. And also her work, since we're talking about emotion, like her work is always emotionally
oh
resonating.
yeah,
I believe she did the book, the dog book with oh gosh, now
the last Let's Go
yeah, the
boy.
last Let's Go boy. Oh my gosh. Like her art in that is just it's very it's kind of like Raissa where it's like I want to say it's like earthy, touchy,
The
like
elemental in some way, right?
elemental, yeah. And that would oh my gosh, that was amazing.
A quick aside, a funny thing about the longest Let's Go boy, or
Hmm.
I think what it's called. Actually, I have it right here.
Yes, it is the longest Let's Go boy by
Um,
Derek
Derek Wilder, right?
Derek Wilder.
And
Yes.
I read this last year when it first came out with my kids for bedtime, and my youngest just loves dogs so deeply, like
Hmm.
a cellular love. They both do, but like um when my youngest we were reading it and he could tell where the story is going, his face got red, his eyes started to, he got like so emotional. Um that we finished the book and he was just so distraught that I immediately turned back and started reading the book backwards
Mm,
so that it would end at the beginning when the when the dog was still alive. Um,
yeah.
because it's just like he was just it hit him on such a deep level.
Yeah.
Um, and Katya has that ability through her artwork to kind of like touch upon those deep emotional nerves. And she's also a follower of his, so she comes to the story from a very personal place as well. So I'm really touched and honored that she's available to work on this and to be able to be in a position to kind of share his life story and share at least an introduction to some of his teachings with the new generation is just such an incredible honor.
I can't wait to see, all your projects that are coming out.
Well,
And are you going to be at like NCTE this year?
I will be at NCT. I think I'm on 5 different panels this
Oh
year,
my
so
gosh.
I'll be busy. But I love that conference. So,
Yeah.
uh, and are you going to be there?
Yes. Yes.
Nice.
So we'll have to do our usual. Oh, I see you. There's your book.
Every time I go to these conferences, my wife Amy is like, "Yeah, it's like you're going to summer camp. It's just
Yeah,
like it's
it
like a
is. It's an
reunion slash
incredible.
summer camp. Just
Yeah,
yeah,
it's an incredible experience because, um, when I went the first time, which was when I saw you there when I was standing in your line, and I was just like a new author, budding and like just kind of meeting other authors and just like literally being able to talk to Jerry Craft or, Juji Morales. I mean, it was just incredible. And then when I came to your line, I was like, oh my God, I love your books. It's like I almost wanted to cry. And then the most hilarious thing happened. I walked up and you knew me. And I was like, how do you even know me? I'm like, I'm just Nadia. And you were like, no, you're everywhere. I know
you're
you.
never just on you.
It was so much fun. But oh my gosh, we can talk there. But for now, thank you so much for joining us on the show, sharing all your exciting projects and things that are happening for you. I can only wish you the best with everything that you're doing, because I feel that the work that you're putting out is needed, and it helps our communities
Oh,
feel
thank you.
seen. And so that's something that's really, really important, especially in how the world is happening today, right now. These books are so needed. So I'm thankful that you're still writing, the stories that our kids need to see. We need to see.
Well, no, thank you so much for that, and thank you for the stories that you're putting out in the world, and for doing everything you do to share a love of books with the world, and making sure that the value that we put out there is seen by as many people as possible. I really appreciate that. So thank you for having, and just for a fun conversation. I look forward to doing this again in person over at NCT.
Yeah, same here. And again, thank you for joining us on the show. Thank you, everyone, for listening. This was Picture Booking Podcast, and I was your guest host, Nadia Salomon. Have a great day.